And Wolf is specifically an attempt by Greg Stout to conflate the English cozy and the American hard-boiled language, and that Wolf is, as we all know who read Wolf, is actually Sherlock Holmes' illegitimate son. And he does exactly the same thing. He pulls shit out of his ass. It's not really detective novels. It's like, until recently, the best thriller writer alive was a guy named Stephen Hunter. He used to be the film critic of the Baltimore Sun. And this guy, in the first 5 or 6 of his novels, featuring Bob Lee Swagger, they were schoolbook demonstrations of expository material buried exposition with payoffs. Point of Impact, the TV series, the movie's just awful. But the novel, Point of Impact, is a lesson in how to write thriller material where you set your material up, bury your exposition, and pay off every single point over a 100-page experience. It's brilliant. It's the most perfect diagram of a thriller I've ever read. This guy doesn't cheat. The Holmes stuff cheats endlessly. The modern stuff lost me the 3rd season when he came back from the dead. That was just utter bullshit.
But yeah,
and I wasn't willing to stretch with him. And there are absurd concepts that I'll stretch for.
But I think we're more accepting of that stretch when it's in another era.
Okay, I'll buy that. All right, all right, okay.
And again, I'm not quite certain of why that is, but I'll go with it if it's fog-shrouded streets in London in 1898.
Yes, I'm there. I'm in your absolutely. Yes.
Whereas if it's Times Square now, Jesus, sorry.
You're a beloved figure.
Or I owe somebody money, one or the other.
You owe money to other beloved figures.
That's good. It's Fred Van Lente talking about the baseball game.
The important shit, right?
Yeah.
So each time this is making the noise, somebody scored a home run?
Apparently.
Put next to the orange.
We say hit a home run, but okay.
Sorry.
Wow, patronizing shit for 200, Alex. I'm on Paul's behalf, on my client's behalf.
Thank you.
So is that a?
Remember, we're old enough that the Mets really were shit.
I was on the campus of Queens College when they won the World Series that year, and watching these guys who were not, they were basically devotees of the Maharishi. These guys were transcendental meditators who had been sitting with the Mets since they were 9, turned into themselves at 11. I'm just like these guys who were spiritual godheads became hitters. They say hitters in Pulp, they don't say hitters. They have no idea what I'm talking about. Just hoodlums for the Mets for 20 minutes. But fuck that shit. Sorry. Digression up here.
So here's the thing that I'm thinking is that most of the Pulp stuff works in the era in which it was created and doesn't work in eras beyond that. I think, except for your Shadow stuff.
That's very kind.
Because I can't think of anything else that's really.
Well, it's also because I shit all over the original material, according to a number of writers of some repute. When I will not name, because I will not dignify them by their acknowledgement. You know who they are. And if you don't ask me later, I'll tell you later. I'm not doing well on being recorded.
I think you also have some of that parallel challenge with the spirit, which doesn't come out of the pulp, but is very heavily influenced by it.
True.
You look at the original material, and there's so much there that, like you said about Citizen Kane, at the time, holy shit, what Will was doing was just leaps ahead, but the tropes have been used 1,000 times since.
Well, I mean, you can trace the origins of comic book storytelling to 3 sources. It's Will Eisner, Harvey Kurtzman, and Kirby Lee. And Eisner owned the 40s. He was the architect. Mm-hmm. He created everything. And that's me being generous to someone with whom I did not have one of those stellar relationships.
All right, so since the panel title is Roots of the Comics, we've talked a lot about the characters. Let's talk about some of the people behind it. We're referring to the people who were the publishers who then went into comics, but also some of the editors, because you have people like Will Reisinger and Jack Schiff coming out of the pulp. What?
Particularly coming out of Standard.
Right, coming out of the pulp to edit the comic material. So what did Wheeler Nicholson and Goodman and Schiff and company bring to comic storytelling, character development, whatever. Thoughts?
I think they brought an efficiency. When you look at the early American comic books, they're a miracle on several levels. One is that the work had some level of passion when it was done as quickly and as cheaply as it was. The creative people were very poorly paid and were very inexperienced by and large. And yet there's things there that made magic that affected our culture for many years. It had to be done very, very efficiently. I think it's also generally extremely efficient storytelling in that they learn from the short stories in the pulps, from the O. Henry logic. He's one of the great writers of that time. How to tell a story that had an impact in really very few words and very few scenes. All of EC descends very much from O. Henry and that kind of pulp logic.
About all of EC except for Harvey's stuff.
Except for Harvey's. And even Harvey's has a lot of it, he just transcends it in some
Yeah,
places.
but Harvey was an outlier. I mean, all of Felstein and Gaines's stuff certainly.
Yeah.
But Harvey really, very rarely sank to that level. He was a separate entity entirely, and a difficult guy, but still
One of the geniuses.
a genuine genius.
Yeah. I don't disagree with your argument about the seminal talents of the business in terms of establishing the storytelling rules. There's little bits and pieces of many other people, but those three combinations just shine so far above the rest. So much of the business culture came out of the pulps. The reason I had a writing career, pulps paid such bad salaries that the deal was usually, we'll hire you as an editor, you can edit Doc Savage, but we can only afford to pay you half of what you need to live on. So you'll earn the other half freelancing, you'll write a story for my pulp magazine every week. And by the way, I'm gonna write one for yours because they ain't paying me much better. Well, when I came into comics in the 70s, that was still very much the business model. We were paid very modest salaries, and the expectation was that everybody would freelance at something. You would write, you would letter, you would paste up, you would color, you would do something. There was money to be made if you needed to make a better living. Not a great living, but a better living. And that culture has disappeared from comics by and large today. Somewhat for the good, in that people, I think, are generally paid better. Somewhat for ill, in that we got to learn an awful lot. I mean, in practical terms, if you were an assistant editor, you would probably learn how to write comics. And some of us turned out to be decent writers, and some of us didn't. But you had tremendous opportunity. So some of that kind of culture came into the field as well. Some things for ill, the idea of just paying generally on flat fees and not having any kind of royalty or reward structure for people whose material succeeded, because in the pulps there was no belief that any one writer particularly mattered very much, and that really followed over into comics. It was all tonnage work.
And even so, a lot of the pulp writers, a number of them wound up coming to comics where the pay was no better, if possibly worse.
Yeah, we've turned up a couple letters. Tony Toller is one of the big historians of the pulp era, has turned up some letters from some of the guys like Otto Binder, who wrote both pulps and comics, where from Binder's perception, the comics paid better. This is not to say the comics paid well, but the time it took him to write comics, he could make more money at that moment than he could writing pulps. Walter Gibson, who was the lead writer on The Shadow for most of the years, I think had the reverse experience. He wrote a few comics, and he was really happy knocking out the prose at an astronomical rate. So I think The comics may have had a little less prestige than the pulps, because they had pictures and therefore were presumed to be read more by illiterates than the pulps. But I don't know that they were a lot lower on the economic food chain for the people.
Okay. Is there anything we can still learn from the pulps today as storytellers or as readers?
No.
Okay.
I think we're the wrong ones to ask.
I don't know that, yeah, are there any 12-year-olds in the room? I think
Yeah.
that's...
12-year-olds don't read the same things or with the same enthusiasm that we did. I've got grandchildren. I have friends with kids of that certain age, and I've introduced them to the Burroughs stuff. They're more interested in the fantastical, and frankly, they're not people who read. They read in packs. They're herd readers. They're not really. They're not outlining readers. I mean, nobody else was reading the shit that I was reading when I was reading this stuff. They read Harry Potter. They read Harry Potter related material. They read stuff like that. And very few of them read for actual entertainment. In the same way, the comics are dying for the same reason that movies and television do the same shit we do all the time, only much more effectively now. You'd think there'd be an audience for Burroughs and certain stuff among 12 and 13-year-olds who were, creepy kids like we were. But there isn't. They don't really give a shit about it. It's too archaic. It's too ancient.
I think in my heart of hearts, that's where I come down on it, is it's just not, it's not embraced, it's not sought out. If you as a 12-year-old kid, I haunted bookstores. That's,
Right. No shit, right.
And there was a paperback version of every goddamn Edgar Rice Burroughs novel, and all of the knockoffs.
2 or 3.
But for the most part, it was all there. You could buy,
To buy Burroughs as a used book.
Burroughs, Robert E. Howard, Michael Moorcock, all that stuff was there, and you went from one to the other.
And in those days, they were publishing the Burroughs knockoffs. Otis Adelbert Klein, anyone?
Lynn Carter, all that stuff.
Edward P. Bradbury, also known as Michael Moorcock. The Tarnsmen of Gore, which were the bondage versions of the John
Norman, yeah.
Right.
And I think it was almost like a rite of passage to work your way through all that stuff,
right.
And I just don't think most of that's even available.
Right.
Look, you walk into a Barnes and Noble, you are not going to find a shelf of
the Burroughs stuff. The Burroughs like vintage.
Yeah, and they're in, they're in really unappealing omnibus editions that are, maybe they have a sword on the cover, but there's no Frazetta cover on the thing to make your 12-year-old heart go.
It was the Frazetta covers on the Carter books from the Science Fiction Book Club that got me to read those.
And for me, you've seen the Dover editions of the Venus books with those 14 and Matani illustrations. Holy shit. The guy literally built his career illustrating the Bible, doing a Burroughs thing, doing this very literal take on the Burroughs material. I love this stuff.
All right, so the pulps, when they were in their heyday, were for largely adults, teens to adults. Is there an equivalent today?
It depends on what you're defining as equivalent, Bob.
Okay.
I mean, a tremendous amount of what's published as YA books are reaching teens to adults. It's not any better written than the pulps were at the time. And a great deal of it is what I broadly define as the literature of the fantastic, dealing with vampires and zombies and science fiction and Harry Potter type magic. I think that's the junk food for this generation, where the pulps were junk food for another generation. And you're dealing in general with a population that is structurally more literate, but not habitually more literate. I think there's a higher proportion of the American population that knows how to read better than was true certainly when I was a kid.
I disagree categorically.
But a smaller percentage that chooses to read and likes to read.
I'm not even sure I agree with that either. I mean, my feeling is in an age in which information and knowledge is provided in ways that are more primitive than current delivery systems, I think the necessity of being able to read, not read critically, but at least read from understanding information, was on a higher need. I think people now get their information from I mean, the subliteracy of delivery systems that happen today supports and perverts what's delivered.
I don't agree, I don't disagree with anything you're saying, Howard. I think maybe the semantic gap here is what I was saying is, technically speaking, we're producing more people who know how to read, but we're not producing as many people who choose to read and exercise that skill and really learn to read and use their faculties in the way that you were just talking about.
I think we're producing a generation of smug smartasses who think they were born knowing shit.
Because they can look up shit.
Right. I just made a dinner reservation on my phone. You know, while I was ignoring my co-panelists.
Where we go?
You got a problem with that. But
Depends on whether we're invited to dinner with you.
It is the villainy of this, you know, that makes. I mean, for example,
We've outsourced our brains.
You know, we don't have to know anything because it's just all fucking there. You know, I avoid using speed dial for that very reason, because I will at least hold on to some concept of the necessity of memory.
You know, I honestly think the pulp equivalent that we have now is called Netflix.
I think it's Warcraft, and I think it's Minecraft, and I think it's Lego.
It's binge consumption of generally cheap,
Acceptable junk food.
halfway entertaining material,
And
with some high points scattered therein.
And I mean, I'm a great believer in the guilty pleasures concept. I love shit. I really do. But I don't think that my liking it or loving it makes it any good. You know, I feel we are entitled to a certain part of our appetites and our diets to be utterly underpenned crap. Okay,
But there's a difference between a guilty pleasure and not knowing it's crap.
Right. That's right.
And I think we have a lot more.
That's right. I mean,
We do have a lot more people that don't see any qualitative difference in this.
with all due respect, comic book fans tend, and when I say comic book fans, you should understand that I have a picture of myself on my bulletin board at the age of 17. I weighed 265 pounds. I was the biggest comic book fan you ever saw in your life. I loved comic books. I adore comic books. There's a tendency to conflate favorite with best. And just because you like something, that doesn't give it the imprimatur of quality. You know, I'm a big fan of pizza, but let's face it, pizza is not good. It's very good, but it's not good. Right? You know, I mean, just the way it is. I mean, it's like I watch enormous amounts of television. I'm obsessed with TV. I always have been. I am the character that was placed in front of the TV in Dream On. I'm that guy. You know, my wife, it drives my wife nuts, and I love TV. And there's a lot of good TV I like, but there's also a lot of really shitty TV that I like. You read that Clive James's new book, Play All? You really got to read this. Okay. It's really good. Sorry.
one of the other differences I'm seeing, based on what my panelists have been talking about, is the fact that you used to be able to get a Doc Savage every month, or The Spider, or G8, or an anthology of stories. Today, you're getting a Harry Potter a year and the series ends and you're looking for the next thing, or it's a trilogy. So you're not getting the same dosage and it's not becoming as much a part of you.
It's a very complicated equation. You're right in what you're saying, Bob, but at the same time, you're also competing in a different way.
Oh, absolutely.
One of the things that's certainly affecting comics today, in the law of unintended consequences, it's really great that you can go and buy a graphic novel format collection of whatever the great story is. But it also means that instead of your Doc Savage story or your Batman story having to compete only with being itself, because that's the only Batman story or the only Doc Savage you can buy that one, you're now competing with everything that's ever been done.
Yeah.
And when we were kids, you're talking about going from bookstore to bookstore to bookstore. You're talking about all the Lynn Carter and the other Burroughs knockoffs. We bought those because you couldn't easily find sometimes the real Robert E. Howard stuff. It was out of print at that moment. So this sort of looks like it. It's got swords and sorcery. I'll try anything.
And there wasn't a huge amount of it. I mean, I can remember as a kid having read Lord of the Rings and going, what do I do now?
Right.
Because there was nothing else. And then Sword of Shannara came out, and you went, holy shit, there's another one. And and now like my oldest son reads that stuff, not voraciously, but and I tell him, man, you have no idea. Because you got like 2 of those a year. And now he's got this, he can pick anything he wants because it's a smorgasbord now.
I mean, I'm spoiled by the internet because I'm a guy who the word source brings to mind, hunting through piles of books to find the gems that I needed for my collection.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I can still bring up the sense memory of the smell of mildewed paper in a cold room in Brooklyn in 1965. It's there. It's in my head. But you're
probably
right.
the smell of Ruby's cigars.
That's just the best.
Joel, you go to the same shop?
Yeah, very much.
Because Demattis was talking about the same shop earlier today.
Well, yeah, Ruby's and Dave's on Ralph and St. John's.
Yeah, you had to live in Brooklyn, apparently.
I mean, or Passaic, New Jersey. But I think
apparently,
you're right.
or Los Angeles was okay too.
Which one?
Los Angeles was okay. There were about four.
That's
four
true
or
too.
five.
I got to those much too late, but
Yeah.
I mean Ruby's and Dave's. I met Gil at Dave's.
Yeah.
In 1963. So the availability of all this material flattens out the landscape enormously.
There's also a fundamental in that psychologists have determined that one of the basic human joys is sort of the pursuit of what we are looking for, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the attainment of it is not always remotely as rewarding as it was. And I
Speaking
think
as a man who's been married 4 times, I can affirm this.
part of why perhaps we all love this material as much as we did is we spent a lot of energy pursuing it, and we got a lot of serotonin going out of that. And I think that doesn't
Does
work.
anybody still say got it, needed, got it, got it, got it, needed?
Yeah, sure.
Got it, needed, got it.
Nobody younger than us.
Yeah.
So, in the couple of minutes left, are there any questions from the audience about anything we've talked about today?
So with the pulps, you guys were talking about, you went from like places you can't access, Africa or maybe the seedy underworld, then that transforms to comics where you've got gods, basically Superman. Then Marvel in the 60s has regular people who've been given superpowers. So you kind of have like this evolution going through and
a place most people couldn't be, which was New York City, which was mythic in its own level.
yeah.
Certainly
So
that New York City.
where do you think that line goes, or does it loop back around it? So you can't have Tarzan in Africa, maybe you have Tarzan in space. Avatar, like you were saying before, you're kind of exploring old ideas, but in a way that makes it accessible again. What do you guys think?
I think cultural amnesia is the dynamic, and I think everything old is new again, constantly. It's just redressed. I mean, Avatar is John Carter of Mars. The Burroughs informs so much of what we do. The crime stuff of the 1920s and 30s informs contemporary material. If someone had told Jim Thompson before he died that he was going to be the single most influential writer in an entire book, in a neo-noir, neo-pulp universe of filmmaking from the mid-'80s to the early aughts, he would have been too drunk to believe them.
It's all still there. It's just in a different wrapper. And I think the people that are doing a lot of that material now don't even know from whence it comes.
That's right.
That doesn't change the truth of its roots, of its origins, but it just means that we're currently, as Howard said, we have cultural amnesia about where this stuff actually comes from.
It's no different in storytelling than if you sat there and you tried to trace back the fairy tales, or if you tried to trace back a lot of Shakespeare's work. Romeo and Juliet doesn't start with Shakespeare. These are somewhere along the line, somebody tells a story that has fundamental human resonance, and that becomes one of the great stories. And we steal from it, and we twist it, and we come back to it as writers and storytellers along the way, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. We drape it in the clothing of our times, the things that we're interested in. I think there are a lot of reasons why the current generation is much more interested in literature of the fantastic than the last generation. But one of them is that what I term the impossibility barrier is broken in these kids. I teach a lot, my conversations with them. They know there's no such thing as vampires, but there could be. Somebody could have a reason for coming up with a genetically engineered virus that could make us need to drink blood. Okay, so.
And we really haven't even mentioned the concept of fan fiction,
Yeah.
which is the ultimate aspirational part of this whole project. I mean, that fucking 50 Shades of Grey, written by that horrible thief, who basically, steals other characters, makes adjustments, and then of course demonstrates it from fraudulence by being unable to do a follow-up.
Apparently, fan fiction started with Conan Doyle,
Right.
who responded to people who wrote into him saying, you go ahead, you do a home story, see if you can do it better. There's a wonderful little book, FIC, FIC, a history of fan fiction that follows.
And Solar Ponds, and, the knockoffs of Sherlock Holmes. The 7% Solution, which is, I think, the single best Holmes movie ever made.
That was a pretty good novel, too.
Yeah, well, I think mine did a pretty good job, Questions?
One more question, because it's just about 6.
The guy, the hipster with the beard.
So you talked a little bit about sort of that early transition from pulps to comics, and the things that got picked up were things like The Shadow, right, moving into Batman, and some of that other sort of character tradition. But things that didn't seem to get picked up, or at least to my awareness, things like G8 and some of the other genres, some of the crime fiction of the Canes didn't, at least I haven't seen.
What about Charlie Byron stuff? Crime doesn't pay, justice traps the guilty. That also was there. I mean, what I find interesting is the guys that I knew of that generation, like Gil and Joe, those guys, they were all obsessed not with The Shadow, but with the Burroughs stuff and with Howard. I mean, when Gil did his name is Savage, he named it specifically. This is Conan in the Streets of New York. That's what it was. He was obsessed with Robert E. Howard, all these guys. And it was too late for those guys when the Howard stuff and the Burroughs stuff was identified by the comic community. They were all of them wanted to do. Yeah, Gil was.
So
and look at Gardner Fox. I mean, Gardner Fox rips off John Carter of Mars in 1956 or Adam Strange. Adam Strange is John Carter of Mars.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Well, I think it's that generation and then it's our generation because we got all that stuff.
Right.
In paperbacks.
That's right.
The paperback revolution of the
Look,
60s and 70s.
The first visual image I ever saw of Conan was by Wallace Wood. It was a cover from one of the Gnome Press editions. And taking the description of Howard as a man with long hair, describing Conan looked like Elvis. He had a pompadour on this cover.
Love it.
Okay. But Frazetta's transliteration of that character on the Lancer books so completely defined that character that no one can step back from that. But yeah, you take a look at this Wallace Wood thing, of Conan looking very much like William Holden or Elvis with this great comic palm. It's when it's done.
I think we're out of time. I thank you all for your attention. Panelists. See you at the show. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to.
That's a really
Yeah,
You got it.
And also, it's one of the when they realize the music was a comedy.